It was supposed to be his sanctuary, his moment of peace. For years, Michael Jordan had worked tirelessly, grinding through the NBA's relentless schedule, pushing his body to the limits, and then some, just to make his dream of home ownership a reality. But when he finally moved into the beautiful two-story house with the sparkling pool that symbolized everything he had worked for, he had no idea his greatest challenge wouldn't be on the court. It would come from his neighbor, Karen Thompson. Michael's dream home, shattered by a neighbor's greed. After a career spent in the limelight, Michael Jordan had earned everything he had ever dreamed of, well beyond the basketball court. His success was measured not just in trophies, but in the fulfillment of his deepest desire, peace. For years he had been hounded by the demands of the game, by the roar of the crowd, by the relentless grind of professional sports. Now, at last, he had a moment to savor his success, a moment to unwind, to live life on his own terms. His new home, nestled in an upscale Atlanta neighborhood, was more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of every sacrifice, every victory, every early morning and late night. A beautiful two-story house with a sprawling backyard and a crystal-clear pool that gleamed like sapphire in the sun. It was perfect. This house was his haven, a place to find refuge after a life lived in the public eye. On one particular summer afternoon, Michael found himself sinking into a lawn chair beside the pool, eyes closed, letting the gentle breeze kiss his face. The world around him seemed so peaceful, as if everything was finally right. For the first time in years, he felt as though he could truly breathe. No interviews, no games, no pressure. Just him, the warm Georgia sun, and his dream home. But peace, as he would soon learn, was a fleeting thing. The sudden wail of police sirens pierced the stillness, slicing through the calm like a sharp blade. Michael's eyes snapped open. He watched in disbelief as two police cars screeched to a halt in front of his gate. The officers, hands on their holsters, stepped out and moved toward his fence. In an instant, the tranquility he had fought so hard to achieve shattered, and his heart sank. This wasn't the kind of interruption he had been expecting. "Sir, we've received a report of a suspicious individual trespassing in your pool area," one of the officers called out, his voice flat and professional. Michael sat up, his stomach tightening. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, who had made the call. It was Karen Thompson, the neighbor who had been watching him from her window since the very day he moved in. It was no coincidence. This wasn't the first time she'd tried to assert control over his property. It was the third or fourth time, actually, and this time Michael wasn't going to let her get away with it. He turned his head and saw Karen through her window, a smug smile playing on her lips as she peered out from behind the curtains. There it was again, the subtle sense of entitlement, the unspoken expectation that she could do whatever she pleased on his property. That was it. He had been patient, far more patient than he should have been, but this was the moment. He wasn't just going to sit back and let her continue disrespecting his boundaries. In that instant, Michael realized something. He had spent his entire life on the court, defending against opponents. But this was something different. This was a battle for his peace, his privacy, his home. And for the first time, he knew exactly how he was going to win. The neighbor, Karen, thought she could push him around. But Michael Jordan had faced far greater challenges in his life, both on and off the court, and now it was time to use every bit of that experience to stand firm and protect what he had worked so hard to build. The first blow had been struck, but it wouldn't be the last. He wasn't going to let her get away with it, not this time. The first trespass, a taste of what was to come. It all started on a day like any other. Michael Jordan, finally settled into his new home, had spent years envisioning this peaceful retreat. After a lifetime of constant travel, public scrutiny, and the pressure of being one of the greatest basketball players to ever grace the court, he had finally earned the right to relax in his sanctuary. His backyard, with its pristine pool, was the epitome of everything he had worked for, a symbol of his commitment, his discipline, and the long road to success. But peace, he soon discovered, was a delicate thing. It could be shattered in an instant, often by the unexpected. Michael had spent hours organizing the patio furniture, making the backyard exactly how he envisioned. The sun was at its peak, casting a warm golden glow over the pool, making it sparkle like a jewel. His heart swelled with pride as he admired his hard-earned prize. This was his moment of reprieve. He had worked his entire career, sacrificed so much for this home, this space that was meant to be an escape from the madness of his former life. Little did he know that the peace he cherished so much was about to be interrupted by an unwelcome presence. The next day, while Michael was out running errands, he received an alert on his phone. It was from his security cameras. He opened the app, expecting to see the usual quiet of the neighborhood. Instead, his eyes narrowed in disbelief. On his camera feed, there she was, Karen Thompson, strolling through his unlocked back gate as if she owned the place. She was dressed in a designer swimsuit, carrying a luxury beach towel, and with a casual air she began to set up camp on his poolside chairs. Michael's blood boiled. This was not the way he intended to spend his afternoon. This wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't an innocent misstep. Karen knew exactly what she was doing. She had no right to be there, yet there she was, acting as if it was all perfectly normal. Michael had been patient up until this point, giving her the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps it had been a misunderstanding the first time, when she had waved from her window, watching him as he set up his new home, but this was a clear violation. She was trespassing, and she had done it before. When Michael arrived home and confronted her, he did so with a calm professionalism that came from years of handling tense situations. He had been trained in de-escalation, and he wasn't about to let his emotions get the best of him. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice steady, "I'm not the maintenance man. I'm the new owner of this property. I'd appreciate it if you asked for permission before using my pool." Karen's reaction was predictable. She feigned surprise, placing a hand to her chest as if she were offended by his very existence. "Oh, I thought you were just the new maintenance guy," she said, her voice laced with condescension. "The previous owners always let me use the pool, but no harm done, right?" The words hung in the air, loaded with an unspoken implication. It was a subtle jab, an assumption that because Michael was black, he couldn't possibly be the owner of such a fine property. It wasn't just her words that stung. It was the way she said them, as if her entitlement to the property was self-evident. Michael kept his composure, but inside, a fury he had not felt in years began to simmer. He could feel his blood pressure rising, his heart pounding in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had faced far more difficult challenges in his life, physical and emotional battles, but this one felt different. This wasn't about basketball. This was about standing up for what was right. "Please leave," he said, his voice unwavering. "You're trespassing." Karen gathered her things, but not before muttering a thinly veiled threat under her breath. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. As Karen left, Michael stood in his yard, staring at the empty pool, his thoughts racing. This wasn't a one-off. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. Karen had crossed a line, and Michael knew deep down that this was just the beginning. She had been testing his patience, pushing boundaries. But the truth was, Michael wasn't like everyone else. He had lived a life of public scrutiny, facing down opponents who underestimated him at every turn, and he was used to dealing with people who thought they could take advantage of him. But this was personal, and he wasn't about to let her get away with it. Over the next few weeks, Michael's suspicion grew. Karen wasn't just content with one minor transgression. She continued to test his boundaries, to see how far she could push him. But every time, Michael stood his ground. He knew he couldn't afford to let this slide, not just for his own peace of mind, but for the principle of it. It wasn't just about protecting his property. It was about standing up to someone who thought they could get away with anything. The trespassing was the first step, but Michael had a feeling it wouldn't be the last. And as much as he wanted to ignore it, to pretend that everything would work out, he knew he had to take action. This wasn't just a fight over a pool. This was about respect, about boundaries, and about taking back control over what was his. And so Michael began to plan. He wasn't going to let Karen get away with this. He was going to make sure she understood that there were consequences for her actions, and he would be ready when the time came. He was done being a passive observer in his own life. This was the beginning of a much bigger story, one that would eventually change everything. Escalating tension, Karen's behavior crosses the line. It wasn't just the trespassing anymore. Karen Thompson had crossed a line, and Michael Jordan could feel it in the air around him. At first, he had tried to take the high road, to remain calm, to be the bigger person. But the repeated invasions of his space, his sanctuary, his dream home, were more than just irritating. They were a direct attack on his right to peace, on his right to live without fear of constant disruption. What had started as a small issue had quickly become a pattern of behavior that Michael could no longer ignore. The first few weeks after their confrontation, Michael had hoped that things would calm down. Maybe Karen had been caught up in the excitement of a new neighborhood, or perhaps she didn't realize how inappropriate her actions were. But no, it only escalated from there. Karen was persistent, and in her persistence there was something more insidious, an undeniable entitlement, as if the world around her was hers to control. It wasn't just about using his pool anymore. It was about dominance, about showing him that she could do whatever she wanted, without consequence. It all came to a head on a Saturday morning when Michael woke up to the sounds of splashing water and loud voices. At first he thought he might be hearing things, the peaceful ambiance of the morning disrupted by nothing more than the neighborhood's usual sounds. But then he looked out the window, and his heart sank. There she was again, Karen, this time with 4 of her friends holding a full-blown pool party in his backyard. The sounds of laughter, the clinking of glasses, the raucous chatter, all filled the air. Michael's first instinct was to rush outside to confront her immediately, but a moment of clarity stopped him. He had seen this before. He knew exactly what she would do. She would play the victim, shift the blame, twist the truth to suit her narrative. He couldn't fall into that trap. He had to stay calm. With a deep breath, Michael walked out onto the patio. "Karen," he called out, his voice steady but firm. "You need to leave, now." "Oh, come on, Michael." Karen's voice floated back to him, dripping with false sweetness. "We're just having a little fun. It's not like you ever use this pool anyway." She waved her hand dismissively, as if he were the one making a fuss. But Michael wasn't fooled. This wasn't about a little fun. This was an invasion. This was her continuing to disrespect him, to walk all over his boundaries, to assume she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. She had done it before, and now she was doing it again. This wasn't just casual trespassing. It was a message. A message that she believed the rules didn't apply to her. "I've asked you nicely before," Michael replied, his voice unwavering. "This is private property and you're trespassing. If you don't leave right now, I will call the police." Karen's face twisted in mock disbelief. "Oh, don't be difficult. We're just having a good time," she said, as though her good time gave her carte blanche to do whatever she pleased. But Michael wasn't backing down. One of Karen's friends, a woman Michael hadn't seen before, whispered something to her, probably trying to gauge how far Karen would push this. Michael's patience was wearing thin, but he remained calm, his police training kicking in, reminding him of the importance of de-escalation. He wasn't going to let this turn into another argument. He wasn't going to let Karen control the situation any longer. "Karen, this is your final warning," Michael said, his tone hardening slightly. "If you ever set foot on my property again without permission, I will call the authorities." Karen, still not taking him seriously, tossed her hair back and sneered. "Go ahead, call the cops. You're just being unreasonable. Besides, my husband plays golf with Captain Richards. He'll have your back." Michael's jaw clenched. The arrogance, the sense of superiority that radiated from Karen was almost too much to bear, but he kept his composure. He wasn't going to let her get under his skin. He had dealt with far worse in his life, on the court, in public life, and even in personal matters. But this was different. This was his home. This was where he had fought to be, where he had fought for peace and solitude. He wasn't going to let anyone, especially not her, take that from him. As Karen and her friends finally packed up and left, Michael felt a simmering rage that he had worked hard to suppress. He could feel the frustration building inside him. It wasn't just about the pool or the party or the trespassing. It was about the disrespect, the disregard for his rights, the constant testing of his patience. Karen wasn't just annoying, she was a bully. And bullies, Michael knew, only stopped when they faced consequences. He stood there in the middle of his backyard, watching as Karen's car sped off down the street, The remnants of her pool party still littered around his patio. The feeling of violation lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. Michael wasn't going to let this go. He had tried to handle the situation with grace, with patience, but it was clear now that Karen wasn't interested in playing by the rules. She thought she could walk all over him, take advantage of his kindness and patience. But Michael knew something she didn't. This wasn't just about protecting his property anymore. This was about standing up for himself, for his peace, for his dignity. He had been pushed too far, and now he was going to make sure she understood exactly who she was dealing with. The next few weeks passed quietly, but Michael knew it was only a matter of time before Karen would try something else, and when she did, he would be ready. This time, he wouldn't be the calm, patient man she thought she could push around. This time, he would stand firm, and Karen would regret ever crossing him. What began as a small issue, a simple trespassing incident, had now evolved into a matter of principle. Michael Jordan was done being polite. He wasn't going to let Karen, or anyone, disrespect him or his home any longer. This was war, and he was ready. The green pool, a plan for karma. Michael Jordan had faced countless challenges in his life. Opponents who thought they could best him on the court, critics who underestimated his talent, and even moments of personal struggle that tested his resolve. But nothing had prepared him for the relentless harassment of his neighbor, Karen Thompson. He had given her countless chances to make things right, hoping that her behavior would eventually stop. But as the weeks wore on, it became clear that Karen wouldn't stop until she faced some serious consequences. The time had come for Michael to take control of the situation, and he knew exactly how he would do it. After the latest intrusion, her pool party with friends in his backyard, Michael could feel the simmering rage inside him start to boil over. It wasn't just about the pool anymore. It was about Karen's arrogance, her sense of entitlement, her complete disregard for anyone else's boundaries. She had made his life a nightmare, and now he was going to show her the consequences of her actions. Michael had been trained in law enforcement, and over the years he had learned that sometimes the best way to handle a bully wasn't with brute force, but with a quiet, calculated response. He needed to do something that would leave a lasting impression on Karen, something she would never forget. He wasn't interested in getting into a physical altercation, but he was more than capable of delivering a lesson that would make her regret ever crossing him. One night, while reflecting on the situation, Michael remembered a conversation with his former partner about pool maintenance. They had discussed a special non-toxic dye used by professional pool cleaners to detect leaks. The dye was harmless, but it reacted with certain chemicals found in cosmetics, particularly expensive sunscreens and lotions. The exact types of products Karen and her friends always used before entering his pool, this gave Michael an idea. He spent the next few days researching the dye, making sure it was safe and legal to use. The last thing he wanted was to cause any harm. But the more he learned, the more he realized this could be the perfect way to send Karen a message, one she would never forget. The dye, once added to the pool, would turn the water an innocuous shade of green, but it would leave a distinct and unmistakable green tint on anyone who came into contact with it. And the best part? The green tint would linger for days, fading slowly, but never fully disappearing. Michael smiled to himself. This wasn't about revenge. It was about teaching Karen a lesson in respect. She had pushed him too far, and now she would learn that there were consequences for disrespecting his boundaries. He carefully planned the next few steps. Michael knew that Karen had already begun to gossip around the neighborhood, spreading lies and rumors about him. Her attempts to undermine his reputation were clear. But Michael didn't care about the rumors. What mattered was that he had the power to turn the tables, to make sure that Karen would be the one left with egg on her face. The timing couldn't have been better. Michael found out through the neighborhood grapevine that Karen had already planned her next pool party, this time inviting a small group of friends to celebrate community values, which Michael knew was code for a covert mission to continue her harassment. He could hear Karen's voice in his mind, so sure of herself, so certain that no one would stand in her way. But Michael had a plan, and he wasn't about to let her get away with it. On the day of the party, Michael made sure to leave his house early in the morning, driving to a nearby store to make sure his exit seemed normal. He knew Karen would be watching, but he didn't drive far. Instead, he parked around the corner, just out of sight, and walked back to his house through a side gate. He wasn't going to miss a single moment of what would come next. He stood at his office window, watching as Karen and her friends arrived. They looked so carefree, so oblivious to what was about to happen. They were laughing, unloading bags and towels, and setting up for what they thought would be another relaxing afternoon by the pool. Michael could hear their voices drift across the yard, and for the first time in a while, a sense of calm washed over him. He was in control now. The dye was already in the water, perfectly blended and undetectable. Everything was set. He watched as Karen made her way to the pool first, her friends following behind her. They all slathered on sunscreen, completely unaware of what Michael had done. He held his phone in his hand, ready to capture every moment. He had already set up additional hidden cameras around the yard, ensuring that every angle was covered. Michael's goal wasn't to embarrass them, not really. His goal was to ensure that Karen learned a lesson in humility, in respect for boundaries, and in the simple truth that no one is above the rules. The first splashes echoed in the air as Karen dived into the pool, followed by her friends. They swam, they laughed, they had no idea what was happening beneath the surface. And then it began. Susan, one of Karen's friends, was the first to notice something was wrong. "Karen, is your skin green?" she asked, looking down at her arm in confusion. The moment of realization hit them all at once. Karen's face twisted in horror as she looked down at her own hands. The bright, unmistakable green tint was spreading across her skin like wildfire. She screamed, her voice sharp and high-pitched, a sound of pure panic. "What's happening?" she cried, as the color spread over her arms, her legs, and even her face. Chaos erupted as the women scrambled to escape the pool. They clutched at their bodies, trying to wipe away the green stain that was spreading with every movement. The expensive sunscreens they had used to protect themselves from the sun were now the very reason they looked like they had been dipped in dye. In the midst of their panic, Michael sat quietly at his window, watching as the women fled his property. He didn't feel vindicated. He didn't feel anger. He felt calm, a quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had taken the high road in the best way possible. He hadn't physically harmed them. He had simply given them a lesson in respect, one that would stay with them for days. The video he captured, with its crystal-clear footage, would go viral in a matter of hours. The green disaster was only the beginning of Karen's downfall. But for Michael, it wasn't about the video. It was about making sure that, for once, someone who thought they could walk all over him would finally face the consequences of their actions. It wasn't revenge, it was karma. And karma, as Michael knew all too well, had a way of making a bigger splash than anyone ever expected. Karma strikes back, the neighborhood's shift, and Karen's downfall. The weeks following the green pool incident were nothing short of a spectacle. What had begun as an isolated issue between Michael Jordan and his neighbor, Karen Thompson, had exploded into a viral event that the entire neighborhood and the city of Atlanta couldn't stop talking about. Karen's humiliation spread like wildfire, and the consequences of her behavior were immediate and far-reaching. The day after the pool party disaster, Michael's phone rang non-stop. His security footage, crystal-clear images of Karen and her friends entering his backyard, engaging in trespassing activities and ultimately becoming victims of their own ignorance, had made its way onto social media. The video had captured the moment perfectly. Karen, confident and smug, diving into the pool without a care in the world, only to emerge moments later a completely different person, covered in a bright green tint that marked her as a trespasser in a way nothing else could. The video, set to the soft jazz music that had been playing during their pool party, became an overnight sensation. It wasn't just the color-changing pool dye that got people's attention. It was the fact that Karen had been caught red-handed in her repeated attempts to undermine Michael and claim what wasn't hers. People rallied behind Michael, applauding him for finally standing up to a neighbor who thought she could take whatever she wanted without consequence. But Michael? He didn't revel in the attention. He wasn't interested in the fame or the mockery. To him, this wasn't a game. It was a matter of integrity. As the video spread across social media, The comment section lit up with people sharing their own stories of similar Karen encounters, people who had been harassed or belittled, people who had experienced the same sense of entitlement that Karen had shown. The hashtag #GreenWithEnvy quickly became the headline of choice, and the image of Karen, green-tinted and embarrassed, dominated every news segment. But it wasn't just the online community that was reacting. Karen's real estate agency, already under pressure due to the viral video, was forced to make a public statement. They released a statement distancing themselves from her actions, condemning the behavior shown in the video. "We pride ourselves on respect for property rights," the statement read, "and the actions shown in the video do not reflect our company's values." This wasn't just an embarrassment for Karen, it was a personal and professional disaster. As the video circulated, people began to dig into her past. Neighbors who had been quiet, who had stayed out of her confrontations with Michael, suddenly found their voices. They remembered the times Karen had tried to get their children's lemonade stands shut down, the times she had complained about Christmas decorations that were too ethnic for her tastes, the times she had used her social status to try and force people to bend to her will. Michael's situation with Karen was no longer an isolated incident. It was part of a larger pattern of behavior that was finally coming to light. The real turning point came when Karen attempted to control the narrative. Embarrassed by the video and desperate to salvage her reputation, Karen posted her own video, attempting to explain her side of the story. In the video, she tried to maintain her composure, but the green tint still clung to her skin, a glaring reminder of her failure. Her attempt at damage control backfired spectacularly. Instead of gaining sympathy, Karen only intensified the ridicule. The viral video was edited to perfection, starting with her trespassing footage, followed by the moments of chaos in the pool, and ending with her desperate, green-faced apology. The community's perception of Karen had completely shifted. Those who had once been afraid to stand up to her now saw her for what she truly was, a woman who had spent years using her position of power and privilege to manipulate others. But now, the tables had turned. Karen wasn't the one calling the shots anymore. The community had rallied around Michael, and in doing so had made it clear that no one, no matter their status or background, was above the rules. At the next HOA meeting, the atmosphere had changed. The usual tension that had surrounded Karen's presence was gone. When she stood to speak, a lone voice from the back of the room began to hum the tune of "It's Not Easy Being Green," and the room erupted in laughter. Karen's face flushed a deep red, but the damage had already been done. She was no longer in control. The room was now filled with a palpable sense of relief. Finally, they were free from her oppressive influence. Within a few weeks, Karen's house went up for sale. The for sale sign appeared outside her property, and the neighborhood collectively sighed in relief. Her departure was bittersweet, but it was necessary. No one would forget the lesson learned from her actions, and no one would ever forget the vivid image of a grown woman, green with embarrassment, fleeing the scene of her own humiliation. The neighbors who had once avoided eye contact with Michael now stopped to chat with him. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street brought over her famous empanadas, offering a warm apology for not speaking up sooner. The Johnson family, who lived next door, finally shared their story about Karen's attempts to get their children's basketball hoop removed, citing it as a decrease in property value. People who had once been silent found their voices, and a new sense of unity was born from the shared experience of standing up to the bully. Michael, for his part, didn't hold a grudge. He wasn't angry anymore. He had fought for his peace and he had won. His backyard, once a place of frustration and confrontation, became the heart of the neighborhood. Michael hosted gatherings, weekend barbecues, and pool parties, inviting everyone to join in on the fun. The kids laughed, the parents chatted, and the neighborhood felt like a community for the first time in years. The final blow to Karen's reputation came when local real estate agents, showing her former house to potential buyers, had to explain why she was selling. "No, the pool incident won't affect your property value," they reassured the buyers. The green dye was completely temporary. But the legend of Karen's downfall had already taken root, and her reputation was irreparably damaged. 2 years later, the memory of Karen's antics was still fresh in the minds of everyone in the neighborhood. Michael's pool remained a symbol of how standing up to a bully could bring a community together. Even the new owners of Karen's former home, an interracial couple with twin daughters, fit seamlessly into the community. Their kids joined the swim team, and Michael helped them practice on weekends. As he looked back on everything that had happened, Michael couldn't help but smile. He had stood up for what was right, and in doing so had helped foster a community that was stronger, closer, and more united than it had ever been before. And as for Karen, well, Michael didn't need to say anything more. The green-tinted memory of her downfall would follow her for the rest of her life, an unforgettable reminder of how karma always finds a way to make a splash. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more and drop a comment below to share your thoughts.